folks, welcome back to Indaba Africa. This is Chris once again. Hello, folks, and welcome back once again to Chris Wyatt Reports. This is Colonel Chris Wyatt, retired. Got to remember that part, retired. Retired from active service, but not from life, folks. Once again, back in central Pennsylvania with my guest today, someone who was on the program, but it's been a couple of years now. He's been quite busy, and that's Dr. Corne Mulder, who is a member of parliament for the Freedom Front Plus and chief whip for the party, and I believe also leads the party in the Western Cape. Dr. Mulder, hochandit, and what did I get wrong in that introduction?
The introduction is spot on, Chris. That's exactly what I'm doing.
Excellent. Well, listen, you were a very busy guy. It's interesting because I'm able to sit down with the leader of your party more frequently than I can get in touch with you. You're that busy. Just so people know, I've been trying to get a chance to talk to you for a long time. And a topic came up recently that I've been railing against ever since Athol Trollop was the mayor of Nelson Mandela Bay. And that is that at the municipal level, coalitions are fractious, and the best bet is for a party to get an outright majority. Of course, in South Africa, that's only really a possibility for two parties in most situations, a third on an occasional. So in most situations, it's the African National Congress, the Democratic Alliance that can manage that. And the third case is, in KZN, the Inkatha Freedom Party can manage that. For a smaller party like your own and the UDM and some of these other parties, Action SA, it's not something that's often has a chance for reality. But the concern I've had about coalitions is we saw what happened in Nelson Mandela Bay. I don't know your views on Athol Trollop, and I'm not going to ask you to share them unless you desire to, but I thought Athol Trollop was a very good mayor of Nelson Mandela Bay, but spent 60% of his time fighting a rearguard action to keep the coalition going. Wondering, what are your thoughts on that? We're going to talk about Gauteng and its fractious coalitions. That's why I've invited you on. So any initial thoughts about my comments there?
No, you're absolutely correct, Chris. Exactly as you say. I would like to start perhaps right at the beginning. And the reason why I've been so busy is that we had local government elections in November 2021. And then the results basically made it clear that we are suddenly now going very much into a new phase in South African politics, and that is coalition politics, which is a new, completely new idea in terms of the South African broader perspective. We've been used in South Africa to one-party dominance because the ANC, being the party that it's been, dominated each and every level of government for many, many years since 1994. But it became clear in the local government elections that phase is now gone. And if you look at our constitution, it basically makes provision for a straightforward, simple, proportional system of representation, not a constituency-based kind of system. So because of that, we are going into a reality of coalitions. And that is exactly what's playing out at the moment. And if I can refer specifically to Nelson Mandela Bay and the role that Athol Trollop played, you're absolutely correct. He was a good mayor. He did make a difference. He was there to make a difference, and he was doing very well. But because of the balance of power being so fractious in that coalition government, a lot of time had to be spent on trying to keep the coalition together instead of applying your energy in terms of service delivery and making a difference. And that's unfortunately part of the process that we are in at the moment.
Well, basically what we're talking about here is you're talking about proportional representation, which means that it's not the focus on the candidate being voted on, but the party. And that, of course, we see at the national level too. And then you get seats based on your percentage of the vote, which it has advantages and disadvantages. The disadvantage is that if you've won more votes in a constituency as a candidate, you wouldn't get a seat necessarily. The advantage being here that small parties still get to be represented. In a country with such a diverse ethnic, religious, and cultural background as South Africa, I don't know. I'm not a fan of proportional representation, but I could see the sense in it in South Africa when you got Xhosa, Venda, Afrikaner, Portuguese, English, Zulu, Xhosa, the list goes on and on. So I understand that, and of course people have their own interests. So it's a system that I often criticize, but I understand why South Africa has it. And you were there when these decisions were made. If I'm not mistaken, you're still the longest serving member in the South African Parliament.
Yes, indeed. You're absolutely right. I was privileged to be in the parliament approximately 6 years prior to the 1994 transition. And I've been there since 1994 until today. So it's approximately 35 years non-stop service. So I saw that. And as a matter of fact, all of those years I was in opposition. But I was part of the negotiation process in Kempton Park for the current constitutional dispensation. And you will normally find a constituency-based system in a very more homogeneous society, as you correctly pointed out, where we are all from the same cultural background, we speak the same language, We have the same religious beliefs, mostly, etc., etc. It makes it much more easier than to have a constituency-based system where winner takes all. But when you come into a diverse society like ours, which is very diverse, and the reason for that is a different discussion, but it's because of what I call an arbitrary colonial boundary drawn in 1910 by the British. If you're in that kind of situation, then you find a proportional system is more representative, where different voices can be heard, and that assists us in the process. And we did not have a normal democracy in that regard from 1994 until about 2 years ago, because it's unheard of that in a system where you've got proportional representation, that one party dominates the system and gets more than 50% of the vote themselves. And that was the case with the ANC for many, many years. But as I've said, we've come to the end of that. The ANC is in decline, and they've gone below 50% in a number of, in the last election in 2021, we had approximately 80 councils, 80, where no party obtained a majority on their own, and that forces coalition governments. And we're going into a new election next year in 2024 on national and provincial level, and my prediction is that we will see the same happening there.
Well, you mentioned arbitrary 1910 boundary, not boundaries. You said boundary. I don't know if that was a Freudian slip. I would infer from that we're talking about the Cape, and because I think all those boundaries were artificial that the Union of South Africa Act imposed on South Africans of all stripes. But I don't know if you want to touch on that briefly, or should we move on?
No, you're absolutely correct. It should be boundaries, because what was then called South Africa, and I always say that's a misnomer. It's not even a name for a country. We're in Africa, no South, so it's South Africa.
It's geographic location. That's what it is.
That's all it is. And some journalist once asked me, so how many people speak the language South African? And the answer is zero. There's no such language. We're artificially forced together. And the ANC has been trying with nation building all along. It's not succeeding because we are diverse, different peoples.
Now, let's go back to that 2020 municipal elections. I started covering that 18 months before the election, during the scam. I'll leave it at that. During the lockdowns and all the other things were taking place. And I cautioned and warned South Africans to get off your bum, get out and vote, because municipal elections is where you can make a difference, because people in South Africa, different than where I live, but people in South Africa see government every day, success and failure at the local level. And if you want your party to succeed and get people to follow your standard, you've got to get out and get people to vote for you in municipal elections so you can rule in councils to bring service delivery with rubbish removal and with law enforcement and water, sanitation, all of these things that are critical just to survive. And that's where the ANC has failed probably the worst, other than their theft, which is just, rampant. So I try to encourage people for 18 months. I had a huge audience back then before shadow banning on YouTube. And promptly, as usual, as I expected, nobody listened. Only about 31% of the electorate went out. But it's a long little introduction here, but let me just, I did that to mention the following. That election saw two clear winners from my perspective. Two smaller parties were clear winners for different reasons. For the Inkatha Freedom Party, which gained or lost about 2% of its total vote from 2016, not much change. But because the ANC voters were angry about KwaZulu-Natal's insurrection and Gauteng's insurrection, in KZN, ANC voters just didn't go to the polls. They cratered in KwaZulu-Natal. As a consequence, the IFP was able to get an outright majority, a coalition, majority coalition or minority coalition in 16 municipalities in KwaZulu-Natal. And Chris Pappas won Umgeni or Howick for the DA. A shocking development there. Not if you followed it locally. But my point here is that that was a great step for the IFP. I just think, and I suspect they're squandering this opportunity to show that they can govern, which is unfortunate. Now, that's just an opinion. Now, the other party that had a tremendous gain was your party. The Freedom Front Plus went from 60 plus councillors to over 200. I don't know what the final count is because the IEC playing games, I think it was around 240. That's like a 400% increase. Your voting totals went up 150, 175%. That's pretty incredible. Are you seeing a tangible difference from having this many councillors, number one, in people in your party gaining political experience serving in government, and number two, having influence on councils? How do you feel where the Freedom Front Plus is today from where it was pre-1 November 2021? That was a long intro for that, but go ahead.
Yes, let me try to respond. You're absolutely correct. And that trajectory that we have seen in that election is still continuing up to today.
In by-elections or what?
By-elections. The IFP are still making inroads in KZN, one election after the other. They are taking wards from the ANC on a regular basis. We are doing very well, exactly the same in by-elections. And if you talk about the Freedom Front Plus specifically, in the Western Cape, where we've got 25 councils, in 11 of those are coalition governments where the Freedom Front Plus is part of that coalition. So we are co-governing with the DA. So when the DA would like to say where the DA governs, it makes a difference. Yes, but it's not because it's only you. We are in 11 of those governments with you making that difference. And the very large focus currently is on the big metros in Gauteng, etc. But there are many governments, in coalition governments, that are slowly, silently behind the scenes making huge progress. So the party is gaining a lot of support at the moment. And we believe it's going to play a very positive role going forward, no doubt.
Well, let's shift our attention to that now, because that's what was the topic. That's why I originally asked you to come on. I wanted to talk about Johannesburg and the unseating of Paul Palatse, the seating of one mayor, then his departure, then the seating of another mayor and his departure. It seems from the outside that the alliance of evil, as I call it, that's my term, not yours, the alliance of evil between the African National Congress and the Economic Freedom Fighters is merely about keeping the Democratic Alliance out of power. Less so the smaller parties, because, if they keep the DA out, they keep everybody else out. It doesn't seem to be about governing, because they've made this Faustian agreement that a third party, a minor third party that will do their bidding, will get the mayorship, and they get all the MEC positions on the city council for the mayor's cabinet. I don't see the ANC or the EFF desiring to govern in Gauteng. It seems like they want to just keep things in the air until 2024, so they can't be blamed for the pervasive service failure deliveries in the metros, in Ekurhuleni, in Tshwane, in Johannesburg. That seems to be to me. I mean, look, I'm in the States, I'm an American, maybe I'm getting it wrong. What's your take on that, Dr. Mulder?
Let me try to give you a perspective. I don't think the electorate out there, although there are, which I call surrogate mayors, and you correctly pointed that out, and we're talking about the metros in Gauteng. In the city of the metro of Tshwane, the multi-party coalition government is governing, and we've got a mayor representing that multi-party coalition, let's say, of the good people.
But before you go on, sorry, but we did have Randall Williams have to step aside recently, so there has been some instability there as well.
Lots of instability as well, but at the moment we are in a majority, and at the moment we are governing. The other two big metros, Johannesburg and Ekurhuleni, you're absolutely correct. And I don't think, although there are surrogate mayors, one from Al Jamaa in Johannesburg and one from the AIC in Ekurhuleni, as far as the public is concerned, they know that this is mayors, we are elected because of ANC and EFF support. Now, why it's so important is the following. I believe that the election and the fight for South Africa going for next year has already started in these metros, because Gauteng is such a dominant province. And within that province, you've got these huge metros with huge budgets. Some of those budgets are bigger than some of the provincial budgets of the metros themselves. So there's a huge fight for political power there. And the steps taken by the ANC at the moment it's steps of desperation, because the ANC realizes they are possibly going to lose power in South Africa, and they are clinging to power under all circumstances. So what's happening at the moment is in both those metros, in Johannesburg as well as Ekurhuleni, no party's got a majority on their own. And I think that is the example that we are going to see going forward. There's not going to be a situation again in South Africa, I believe, for the foreseeable future in any case, where one political party in a disproportional system will get more than 50% on their own. Not the ANC and also not the Democratic Alliance. It's not going to happen. And that forces you into coalitions. Now, the problem is, in both Johannesburg, we did form a multi-party coalition government, and we could do so, and we could keep the ANC and the EFF combined out of that government. In Ekurhuleni, we also formed a multi-party government, but that government was a minority government right from the beginning. The moment when the ANC and the EFF could come together, we couldn't succeed, and we couldn't stay in government. The problem is that there's a difference between the ANC in the province and the ANC on national level in terms of how to proceed. In the province, they want to get the Democratic Alliance and the multi-party coalition out of power under all circumstances, because they realize they have to do that in order to maintain their stronghold on the position, on the province for next year's basic election. So the agreement at the moment is, the deal basically was Johannesburg will go to the ANC and Ekurhuleni will go to the EFF. But the ANC can't vote for an EFF candidate, and the EFF can't vote for an ANC candidate. They've been instructed from above. So because of that, now they have to vote for a third party, a little surrogate Mickey Mouse party, so that they can at least get the multi-party government out of power. That's what's playing out at the moment. But the electorate knows these Mickey Mouse surrogate parties that are governing at the moment, as the mayors, are there at the courtesy of the ANC EFF alliance.
Well, and that of course is the point. They're just puppets. I don't know how argue any difference. Gate McKenzie was all excited because Corne was the mayor over the weekend. So what? It's over the weekend. Acting mayor. It's the Patriotic Alliance. A whole other kettle of fish. We might talk about that in a little bit there. But listen, we have unpacked quite a bit in just 15 minutes. Wow, that's quite a bit of topics both of you and I have discussed here shortly. But I do want to just briefly reflect on one thing before I come back to a question from a viewer, and then also another point, and that is I think we've got fake advertising here. This is fake news. The building behind you doesn't look like that anymore, does it?
To a certain extent it does. The facade looks like that, but most of the windows are currently out. The building was basically gutted in a fire about 18 months ago. And by coincidence, we had a meeting last week in Parliament where they have now at last started with the reconstruction process. The decisions have been taken, and it will start to hopefully reassemble and rebuild the building. Yes.
Well, I do have a question which I was unable to get answered when I was in the mother city of Cape Town and I walked by that facility. And that is, why in God's green acre did someone not put a tarp over the roof of the building to prevent hundreds of millions of dollars of rand of damage, letting rainfall fall in there? That's the most inept, incompetent, moronic stupidity that I've seen since Joe Biden became president.
Don't expect the ANC to think beyond today.
Well, I think that probably tells us all we need to know right there. So I'll get to the question in a moment, but the point I wanted to make here with you, Dr. Mulder, is the following. This is maybe it's time for a change in South Africa's version of democracy. Specifically, what I mean is that the parliamentary process clearly is not helping residents of major metropolitan areas. With this ability for a coalition to unseat a mayor, perhaps it's time to reconsider the Constitution and amend it, although this is probably an impossible task, to amend it so that a mayor would serve a term and could only be removed for malfeasance or impeachment or something like that, rather than political parties getting the vote to unseat someone just so they can steal power. It's very, if I lived in Joburg, I'd be very disheartened about what's happening, not to mention Ed Carlini, and the list goes on and on.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Let me use an example. If you go to a scary movie, you watch a thriller movie, and normally, or you see a movie where this alien strong force from outside the universe comes and destroys things. And
District 6! No, District 9, whatever. What is District 9? That movie, yeah. District 9.
Typically in that kind of movie, you'll find that there is one thing, a silver bullet or a magic potion or something that can stop this menace. Now, we come to the political sphere in South Africa. That silver bullet that can remove the ANC from power is coalitions. That's the only way. Coalitions is a magic bullet to remove the ANC and the EFF from political power. And that is what we need to do. And it can be done. There's no doubt about that. We are going through a difficult process at the moment, but I do believe that it can be done. There are some councils that you will have a minority government in any case. But in the city of Tshwane, we do have a majority, and we will govern, and we will need to take the correct steps. City of Johannesburg, there's a new opportunity coming rather sooner than later, I believe, to once again take power there. But we must make sure, and we need to get the electorate to understand the system. Now, the point that you made, was it in September of last year, there was a delegation that visited Norway. No, it was Denmark. Sorry, it was Denmark. And we had a look at their system. And the point that you've made is exactly there. In Denmark, it works like that. If you've got the mayor elected, that mayor is in charge for that council for the full term, unless there is some real big problem of theft or corruption or something. And that gives stability that the mayor can proceed and continue to govern. And those are the kind of things that we should perhaps be looking at. I agree with that, because it will bring the necessary stability. At the moment, the ANC knows that every time that they destabilize one of these coalitions, it's in their interest, because it causes despondency with the electorate that say, oh, maybe nothing can be done. We cannot defeat the villain. We cannot defeat this evil power. And I understand that. But the important thing is, and as you correctly said in the beginning, you were trying to get the electorate out there to vote. That is going to be one of our biggest challenges going into the election of 2024. But I guess we'll come to that.
Well, apathy, I imagine, will be a problem coming up. But, it's interesting because as far as that situation, it serves the ANC and the EFF very well that they allow chaos to continue because they've run things in, not the EFF, they haven't been in charge, they don't want to be in charge. They had a mayorship they won in Free State and they gave it up. They made their mayor resign before she ever took office because they don't want to govern. They just want to create chaos. But the thing is that they create this disaster over 3 decades, then they're finally thrown out. And they sit back and carp, and 6 months later, well, the streets aren't fixed, and electricity isn't working, and I mean, Tanya Campbell didn't stand a chance in Nicklin. She didn't even have a fair chance. But things are so bad in some places that, as my argument, if you get an outright majority, Chris Pappas and the DA have an outright majority. They barely won it. They won it by like 35 votes in one ward, but they got it, and they're governing. And they're already saving the city 500,000 Rand per month or something like that just by getting rid of debt. And the debt wasn't acquired to build streets and fix potholes and bring electrification and law enforcement. It was for salaries, for dead weight salaries. So things are so bad that you can fix it. But in Gauteng, it's so complicated. The councils are so large. You got over 200 members of Joburg Council that I really feel for political parties because the moment you're in, the ANC and the EFF are trying to destroy you, and then they're trying to blame you for the mess the ANC created.
That's correct. No, you're absolutely right. The ANC and the EFF will do that, and they will continue to do that. The question is, what is our alternative? What is our option? And the fact is that there's no alternative. We have to get the ANC and the EFF out of power. There's no doubt. So the election that took place in November of 2021, we are stuck now with those results for a 5-year term, which will take us to 2026. And we have to work with that and find solutions and find a compromise in terms of making a coalition work. On the other hand, the election that comes next year, that's a message to the electorate to go out there and to make it possible to be in a stronger position than we are at the moment with regard to those councils. But the electorate understands and they know that the ANC will do everything in their power to undermine, to try and prevent you. They will do anything legal or illegal to make it impossible for you to govern. But there's no alternative. We have to do that. And we have to take South Africa beyond the ANC. The ANC had their chance. They've got no positive contribution to make. It's an organization that should be taken out of the political spectrum altogether.
Yeah, and what has the ANC brought South Africa? Racketeering, racism, bigotry, bifurcation, hatred, pervasive theft. Oh, amazing accomplishments. What a disgrace to the liberation movement and to the original organization founded in 1912. I mean, these people, their ancestors would be rolling in their graves looking at what despicable reprobates they've become.
They inherited the most developed, most modern state in Africa. And they've destroyed it, basically. And they did that in 30 years. And the irony was when they took power in 1994, I tried to prevent that, obviously, and we were involved in opposition politics in those days. But people were quite naive and to think, let's give the ANC a chance and everything will be kumbaya and happy, and there we will go. The opposite happened, and that was completely predictable, obviously, that the opposite would happen. But now we've moved beyond that point, and I think more and more people are disillusioned with the ANC, and the best way to get rid of them is at the polls as soon as possible.
Agreed 100%. So the question, it was earlier I want to get back to, is Craig Johnson asked, just a quick question, will it help to vote for my smaller party, or will my vote have a bigger impact going to the official opposition? I'm not sure what you mean by official opposition. And I'll let Dr. Mulder answer, but let me just put that there quickly. Again, this is a conversation, folks. It's not strictly an interview in the press. It's the Indaba conversation. And we're trying to tease these issues out and talk about them with noted personalities and figures. So here's the point from my perspective, and I give Dr. Mulder a chance to answer your question and address or contradict what I say. Just go vote. Not ANC, not EFF. I don't care if you vote for the Freedom Front Plus, the DA, Action SA, UDM, IFP, or the little party that I've helped up there in Zeerust, the Forum for Democrats, who was cheated out of their seat by the IEC, but I helped them get their seat. I don't care. You got to get off your bum and vote. That's the step one. Step two is make sure that you're not pulling the lever for the ANC or the EFF, and maybe, I don't know, a few other parties. That's step two. Every vote that's not for the ANC or EFF gets them below 50%, below 40%, and makes it more feasible for a grand coalition to form. That's my view. I'm agnostic. I'm trying to be objective here, and that is my genuine view. Dr. Mulder represents the Freedom Front Plus. I suspect he might feel somewhat the same way, but he probably wants you to vote for the Freedom Front Plus. The stage is yours, Dr. Mulder.
Let me try to explain. I've got a vision for what it's worth, and that's why I've been so busy lately. I got involved with these coalition things and trying to put these coalitions together. I was then appointed as the chairperson of a technical committee dealing with these negotiations with the different coalitions. And I've been involved in that on basically almost a daily basis, negotiating the coalitions in these metros, in many of these councils, etc. Now, the question is, what do we do with that going into the elections of next year? And the vision is very simple and very clear. And that is what I'm putting forward at the moment, and that is what we need to do. First of all, if you take the total number of votes between all the current opposition parties, and now I exclude obviously the ANC and the EFF, if you take all the combined vote of opposition parties, you're talking about 32 to 37% of the current electorate in South Africa. If we just go back to the polls as we've done in the past, all we will be doing is we will be rearranging those 32 to 37% of the vote between the parties. One party will get more, one may get less. It will change nothing in the bigger scheme of things. We need to think completely differently. What do I say in that instance? I've said in the past, and I've written an article in that regard, I said what we need is, we need what I called in the past, way back before 1994, there was an organization called the UDF, the United Democratic Front. It was a front for the ANC, and I'm using the term UDF or new UDF just to put the principle on the table say what...
Sorry to interrupt you. Was that Alan Bosak? Was he involved in that?
Right. Yeah, that's correct. Right. We need something like that. In other words, we need a broad civic movement in South Africa from now until the elections. And part of that broad movement should be the whole of society, the trade unions, the farmers, the academics, the churches, the individuals across the board, and we should get people involved in that to create this huge movement with one simple item on the agenda: regime change in 2024. And no one will be able to sit back and to say, well, I hope you succeed, because there's no you, it's us. Everybody should get involved in that and get people out there to register so that they can vote. Part of that process would be, in that broad church, would be that we identify, let's say, 10 broad principles around which we build this issue, this movement. And those are the principles that you'll find in any modern, successful state out there. Zero tolerance for corruption, small civil service but effective and professional, guarantee of private property and free enterprise. And you can go along that route in terms of the best international practice principles. That movement should also have a logo. And then you can have political parties from the opposition that also associate with that will also sign up to this broad movement. Once we get to the election, each of the parties that signed up to be part of this broad movement will have their own posters with their own logos, etc. But I want to see in the corner of those parties that support this, also the logo of this broad movement. And then the nice thing is this: when the electorate goes to the polls, you can vote still for the party of your choice. But you will know that my party that I vote for will also form part of this broad church, this broad movement that can form a government and a coalition government after the election with these principles in mind. And that is what needs to be happening in South Africa, and it's already playing out at the moment, slowly but surely.
What you're referring to is what I've termed for some time now a grand coalition. That's what I've been talking about. Recently spoke to Bantu Holomisa. Between Bantu and yourself, you guys are kind of the graybeards in Parliament there these days. But talked to him about the same topic. But, listen, the ANC is doing its best job to effect a regime change on its own accord with the Lady R, Simon's Town, and pissing off the Americans. I find it fascinating. We won't get into this now, but if we have time, we'll get back to it. But what I find fascinating that South African political analyst and Propaganda 24, I'm sorry, News 24, carrying this story, talking about, well, America is only our second largest trading partner. Sure, squander that $21 billion a year in trade, that $18 billion a year in direct foreign assistance, which is buying all your antiretrovirals and things like that. You don't need that in South Africa. You don't need to send your BMW parts to the U.S. You'll do just fine without that in your collapsing economy. The whole thing is just, but they're doing a good job of their own. Nick Groves had a question here. He said, or a statement actually, and let me give my thoughts on this and I'll get your response. Nick said, I always thought the Freedom Front Plus was a fringe, almost far right, but actually very centered, moral, and good political insight. So let me address that. When the party was formed in the 1990s, it was seen as I'm not using this derogatory fashion, but far to the right, a right-wing white minority party to give a voice to conservative South Africans, white South Africans. Over time, the party has changed significantly in my view. It's right, but it's center right in my view. I've described the party as center right. If you look at the 2019, and I cringe when I say the word manifesto, but that's the logic in South Africa. You guys say manifesto, but that's a commie word for me. So I say the Freedom Front Plus's platform in 2019 was simply slightly center of right. It wasn't right wing. It wasn't for whites. It was for everybody. And it's about faith, family, and flag to some degree. That's where I see the Freedom Front Plus. And I've explained that to Dr. Groenewald, and he liked my description. In fact, he told me he's been using that term in the press, and it's caught on that the Freedom Front Plus is a center right party, not a right wing party, which I think is a fair assessment. And I think that Nick Groves also agrees. Today, the party is very different. And I've talked to Dr. Groenewald and some of your candidates in the 2021 municipal election about reaching out to other South Africans beyond traditional Afrikaans-speaking South Africans. And I think that's where your party's trying to go. Is that a fair assessment on my part of where the Freedom Front Plus is and where it came from?
Yes, you're absolutely correct. We are a center-right party in that instance. And the things that we stand for are exactly the real test in terms of what real democracy should stand for. So specifically in the Western Cape, where I'm responsible for, the biggest population group in the Western Cape are the so-called coloured community. And we are reaching out to them very much so. And I've got lots of support. As a matter of fact, in the 2021 election, the majority of my candidates in the Western Cape were not white Afrikaner people. They were mostly coloured people. So the party is reaching out to other communities. That's just one, but also we're getting support across the board at the moment from different other communities because exactly of the position that we are putting forward and also because of the role that we are playing in coalitions. The Freedom Front Plus is being seen as the most stable, the most reliable coalition partner. And I think it's very, very important. You have to move to a point where you realize it's more than just about your own party itself. You have to be part of a bigger whole, because in that regard, we can have success, put a government together and start to govern in the best interest of society.
Well, I saw that one of the messages here from Courtney McBride disappeared. I didn't get a chance to read it. My apologies, Courtney, if you want to put the message back up. It was a question, I think, and I'll get back to it. But Dr. Mulder, let's get back to Joburg just briefly here very quickly. What a mess. What an absolute mess. Well, I mean, if I was a South African, I'd be embarrassed by what's been happening in Gauteng and particularly in Joburg. It seems, and we're going to come back to this, and I don't want to put you on the spot, and maybe you'll answer as a politician, and maybe you'll answer with your heart, maybe you'll answer in a way we won't anticipate, and that's about the DA and its big brother attitude that many attribute to it. But I mean, it's embarrassing for South Africa. Excuse me a second here. I keep getting notified that I've got a message at the top of the hour. Thank you, phone. I know that, but my phone keeps telling me every minute, keeps flashing over here. So I mean, this is just a mess. I would be embarrassed as a South African for people to see what's happening in Johannesburg. Any thoughts on that?
Yes, I will give you the facts, and the facts speak for themselves in Johannesburg. Let me try to explain. In Johannesburg, you've got 270 councillors, 270. To govern, you need 136. No bloc does have 136 on their own. The multi-party coalition group, with which the DA is part of, the Freedom Front Plus is part of, we can muster 130 votes. On the ANC side, the ANC, the EFF, and a plethora of small other parties, they can muster about 132 votes. So neither can govern. And then you've got the Patriotic Alliance. It's a political party with 8 votes. And they are the kingmaker. Where they put their 8 votes, that group will govern. So we started off in Johannesburg, and the Patriotic Alliance was part of our government. They were part of the multi-party coalition, not right at the beginning, but after a while they joined the multi-party coalition. They became part of that coalition. And we governed together for about 6 months, and it went quite well. There was no problem in that regard. And then things did go wrong, and it didn't need to go wrong. What happened was there was a motion of no confidence brought in the Speaker of the DA at that stage, Vasco da Gama. That motion of no confidence succeeded, and then there needed to be elected a new speaker. And then there was a proposal that came from some of the coalition parties to say, but we should be more diverse and more representative in the top structures of the coalition of not only the Democratic Alliance. And there was a proposal that the speaker should come from the IFP. And the opposition party supported that. The DA was not prepared to do that. The DA insisted that it needs to be somebody from the DA. That person couldn't get the majority, and that then caused the collapse of the government after that. So Johannesburg, once again, can be rectified. It can be done, but then you need to draw parties towards you and not push them away. And what we've seen when we visited Germany, when we visited Denmark in those study of coalitions, the larger party, and there's no such thing as a big party as far as I'm concerned, because if you don't have 50 plus 1, you're not really big. You're bigger than some, but you're not big enough to govern on your own. So the larger party needs to be the most humble of all the parties in the group, because they've got the most to lose. They need to act in such a way that they accommodate other parties and draw them closer to one another. If that's the question, that's a different issue altogether, if that's the case.
Well, in fact, that is a comment that a lot of people have made from smaller parties, is that I'm not going to dance around this, the Democratic Alliance, others are saying they're arrogant and that they demand it's our way or the highway, which doesn't seem, if it's true, to be a very prudent position to take, because, you've got to work with people and you can't just simply say, okay, we need your votes and now we've got a coalition, but you're going to sit over here in the corner and we're going to make all the decisions. Now, conversely, the DA has a fair argument saying that, well, listen, we won the most votes. We shouldn't be sitting at the back. We should have a big voice in this too. It's got to be a happy balance of the two in a coalition, and that seems to have been challenging in Gauteng.
Absolutely. I've said on more than one occasion in tweets or whatever the case may be that the DA is arrogant. Not always, but sometimes they do. Every time when a political party, any party says, only we can do this or that, that's arrogance. If you believe in a coalition, you can never say only us or only we. You have to be part of a larger whole, and if you can't do that, it's a problem. Now, I must say, maybe on behalf of the DA, until rather recently, the DA was under the impression, and they pushed that agenda, that the DA is the only party big enough and strong enough to defeat the ANC. And as long as you push that agenda, then you still believe that if everybody just votes for the DA, maybe we can defeat the ANC. Trust me, it's never, ever going to happen. I know some of the leaders of the DA have said, but let's say there are 15% vote there, out there, support there amongst different political parties. If all of them just would vote for the DA, it's not going to happen. The fact that those parties exist is because those voters don't want to vote for the DA. They don't want to vote for the ANC. They want to vote for a party that they feel accommodated in. And that's why the broad church idea is the right way to go. So I absolutely agree. The larger party, or the bigger party, being the DA, should not take a back seat. They should be very prominent, part and parcel of that. But please act in such a manner that you respect other parties and they will respect you.
Well, one thing I will say, I did catch that you have criticized the DA for that, for being arrogant. So I haven't put any words in your mouth. But one thing that I say frequently about the DA is they're very good at own goals. They do a great job to use I hate soccer. I'm a rugby guy, but own goal is a great term. They're great at own goals. They do it all the time. I mean, how did the DA? They come out of the 2021 municipal elections and they're like, we were the only party not to lose. I'm like, what planet are you on? Are you smoking? Are you taking tick? Are you smoking dacha? What's going on there? I mean, you lost 37% of the voters you got in 2016. The ANC only lost 32%. How is that a victory? They lost control of municipalities they've ran in the Western Cape for 20 years. It's unbelievable. And we still have this mess in places like Corne, which is a total disaster, where a convicted child rapist was reelected mayor. It's just insane. And we think we can lay that, and I'm not asking you to do it, but I think we can lay that at the feet of the DA for such an abysmal municipal campaign. Whereas on the other hand, I have to compliment your party. You ran a discreet, quiet, but effective ground game, and we see it in a quintupling of representatives in municipalities.
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely correct. I understand that the DA comes from a certain perspective in the past, and which they really thought they could become only the biggest party. It's not going to happen. And the reasons are quite clear. So the alternative is, let's cooperate, let's form this coalition, let's respect one another, and we can go forward. But every time when the DA tries to prescribe to other parties, they get all the other parties to say, no, we don't want to be prescribed. Let me give you the latest example. When we got to the Johannesburg issue about 10 days ago, we were in negotiations, and the DA came in there and into those negotiations, and they just announced their candidate will be former Mayor Mpopolatse. They didn't interact with other parties. They didn't say, we want to propose that. What do you think? They not once asked any other party, would you please vote for our mayor? It was just a fact, take it or leave it. Now, the point is, they on their own, they couldn't muster a majority. They can do whatever they like. You have to accommodate other political parties. I hope that they've grown. If I look at what the leader, John Steenhuisen, is doing at the moment with the Moonshot Pact, let's see and hope that they have learned a lesson or two, and then we can really go forward. Because in the end, if we can't come together, we will all lose, and the ANC will stay in power, and that's what we can't afford.
Well, I think the term Moonshot Pact is a bit overambitious given the fractious politics of South Africa. That's why I prefer the Grand Coalition. I named it before Steenhuisen did. He's late to the game in my view. I've been talking about the 2024 election since November 2nd. By the way, Dr. Mulder, I predicted on November 2nd, based on events at that time, which a lot can change between November 2021 and some date in 2024, which is coming up. I predicted the ANC would get 38 to 42% of the popular vote for those who bother to vote in that election. We'll see if I'm right. All things being equal, they should be lucky to get 30%, but it's not going to pan out that way, I don't think. But we'll see what happens. But every percentage matters to get the ANC and its little armed wing, not them Contoisi's way, but the economic freedom fighters. The guys that show up at Brockenfell with knob carries, golf clubs, and pungas in impy-like formation, then scatter like cockroaches when one water cannon is turned on them. Sorry, a little political commentary on my part there. I couldn't resist. But so there was a question here, and the viewer who asked the question says, well, it seems like a little trivial question, but he asked the question. He said it was superficial. But let me ask this. He said that, when the party was founded, your party, the Freedom Front Plus, you had a different logo with orange and blue, and then it's changed later to green and orange. Now, he's wondering why. Well, the orange and blue, of course, is traditional South Africa. It dates back to the House of Orange from the Netherlands. At what point did the Freedom Front Plus change its logo and its colors, and what was the motivation behind that?
Yeah, sure. You're absolutely correct. The orange and blue basically is the traditional South African colors in that instance. At some stage, it could be 2004, around there, I think, when we changed the logo. The name remained the same. We added the plus because we absorbed certain parties, the Conservative Party, the Federal Alliance, and others came part of us. The change to green is for the following reason. The color orange plays a very important role in South African history. If you go way back to our forefathers in Europe, Prince William of Orange, and the connection with the Netherlands, etc., there's a very strong connection in that regard, also a religious connection. But the color green, as far as we are concerned, symbolizes to us our continent, Africa. We are part of Africa. You'll find the color green in 45 of the 55 countries of Africa, the flags, you'll find the color green. So in us, it's symbolic, saying the descendants from Europe who made Africa their home and who are now become Africans or Africans in Africa. And that is part of that. There's no other reason basically for that. And you will also find that by coincidence or not by coincidence, the solidarity movement, their colors would also be orange and green. So that is part of a bigger scheme or a bigger reality, I think.
Well, and that's actually an apropos point to ask a question along those lines. And thank you for that answer. No, it makes a lot of sense. In the build-up to the last election, I got a lot of questions from my viewers who are asking, well, is the Freedom Front Plus interested in black voters? Are they reaching out to black voters? For the sake of clarity, folks, the Freedom Front Plus early on was a party focused on Afrikaans speakers, but is reaching to a larger audience today. I'll give Dr. Mulder a chance to answer that for you right out of time. And then election, it's important for people to understand that Afrikaans is spoken by about 2.8 million white South Africans as their first language. 6 to 8 million colored South Africans is their first language. About 100 or 200 or 180 or 200,000, something like that, Indian South Africans, and about 200,000 black South Africans. Afrikaans is their first language. So on that basis alone, you're already looking at more than just white folks. But I understand the party is hoping and reaching out to other candidates to get some from who have like-minded views, because it's not about skin pigmentation. It's not about language. It may have been at one point for your party, but I believe today it's about your values, faith,
Correct.
family, flag. Is that accurate?
Absolutely correct. Absolutely so. And part of that within the South African context, because the notion of one nation is a very strange concept because of diversity. We look at the different communities as such, and we are reaching out to other communities. A few months ago, we've now got our first black councillor in the Limpopo province. And we are at the moment being inundated by people from the traditional black community who are reaching out to the party and say, but we want to become part and members of this party because of the vision, because of the values that we stand for, and because of the role that we are playing in stabilizing South Africa going forward. So it's absolutely happening at the moment.
Well, that's brilliant. Sadly, we're short on time here, so I'm going to wrap it up in just a moment there. And I want to thank Dr. Mulder for his time. It's really great to reconnect with you and get a chance to chat once again. A lot has happened since the last time we spoke in South Africa. Quite a bit has happened. Quite a bit's happened in America too, and most of it not for the better, unfortunately. And Ukraine and all these other places. We didn't really get into the ANC's own goal in Simonstown. Maybe another conversation. When I get back to South Africa, which will likely be in August, before I head off to the World Cup in France to cover rugby. I'll be back probably in August. Hopefully I'll get a chance to meet you maybe down there. We can chat, have a conversation, maybe do an in-person interview. But let me give the floor to you for any last comments you might want to say about coalitions and or about a pitch for 2024 to bring people to your standard. If you like, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much. And I would like to start off, Chris, by saying thank you very much for the opportunity. It's always a privilege and an honor to participate in any discussion with you. And really, I want to thank you for the wonderful work you are doing and bringing out some information there to the rest of the world. Thank you very much for that. I'm an optimist, and I really believe that we will do great things coming next year in the 2024 election. There are wonderful things happening. I hope to be part of a delegation. We hope to take 8 or 9 opposition leaders to the US before the end of June of this year to put South Africa's case. We hope to visit and bring the message quite clearly through. And also this whole civic organization thing, the broad church, is taking off in South Africa at the moment. And we need to give people hope. There's never ever a reason not to be positive and be hopeful. There will be a day. I was in Parliament when the ANC came into power. I intend to be there soon when the ANC loses power. That's where we are heading.
Well, that's an interesting statement and an awesome one, depending on your perspective, I would imagine. A frightening one, maybe, for the ANC. But thank you so much for that. And by the way, that group of opposition politicians, if they get over to the States, I'm not far from D.C. If there would be interest, I would love to cover that. And also maybe if I can help out in some way or be involved, just let me know. Anyway, thank you so much for your time, sir. Appreciate it. And I'll say bye donkey. And we'll wish you a wonderful evening, because it's evening coming up soon over there. And I'll let you drop off and I'll wrap up here because I've got to head over to Germ Warfare for my news broadcast over there. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Goodbye.
All right, folks, Dr. Corne Mulder from the Freedom Front Plus right there. So thanks for tuning in. Appreciate your time being here. You can go to TNT Network. That's if one of my mods can put the link up there, you can hit the click on the listen live and you'll get the pop up and listen. It's a radio program. I'll be on Jeremy Nell's Germ Warfare in about 13 minutes discussing news. I am now the U.S. political correspondent for Germ Warfare, a global broadcast that is emanating from Australia, but of course, Germ is in South Africa. Thanks to my guest, Dr. Corne Mulder. That was fantastic. It was a long time, difficult to schedule him with all the work he's doing trying to build coalitions, but I think it was well worth the time. No, it's not the Turner Network Television, Courtney. It's TNT. Anyway, thank you all so much. Be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to become a subscriber if you don't mind. We're just now building up a big audience. My apologies. I will be back with the news after I finish on the TNT network with Jeremy Nell. So at noon Eastern Standard, 6 p.m., it'll be the normal news. Thanks for tuning in, folks. And feel free to share my videos. There's the link from Hendo there. Pop-up player. That's the one you want right there. You'll be able to listen to me on the radio. We'll talk about U.S. politics, probably a little bit about South Africa as well. Okay, folks, take care. Have a lovely day. Appreciate your support for the channel. And we'll catch you right here in a couple of hours. Cheers.